following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
I basically built a subgraph and refactored everything and got it to work. That I sort of, in doing that, became a sort of graph fanboy in the sense that it made my app so much simpler. I could do stuff that wasn't even possible. And I guess I came to the graph as a user, which I think is really, really cool. Place to start. And think about where I am now. I've never worked on a product that I've been a user of before.
GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Adam Fuller, product manager at Edge and Node, a core dev team working at the Graph. As you're about to hear, Adam brings an incredible intellect to the Graph ecosystem with an impressive professional background that spans advanced degrees in biochemistry, a stint in management consulting, 2 years at Google, and then working at Circle to launch the stablecoin USDC. During our discussion, Adam talks about his move from using the Graph to working full-time at Edge and Node, his passion for utility, and how the Graph enables developers to build, and his insights on Web3 and decentralization. As always, we started the discussion by talking about Adam's professional and educational background.
A long time ago, studied biochemistry at university, so I think people often think about science as being quite technical, but actually we sort of barely used computers for a lot of my degree. It was a lot of sort of writing essays, more like lab wet science. So I work in labs, and so I worked in labs at my university. I spent a couple of really great summers working in labs in sort of Boston and then New York. So it was a really great experience, and actually that was when I actually started doing some data analysis sort of as part of that. And then I guess was at a point where I wasn't sure what to do, and I guess like a lot of people who aren't sure what to do sort of decided to become a management consultant for some reason. So I did that for a couple of years, met a lot of great people, had a lot of fun. It's lots of young people working together. It was a good first working experience. But then sort of thought I'd like to go and work for a company. Thought tech seemed interesting and had a load of imagination, so went and worked for Google because it was a tech company I'd heard of. And so I was there for a couple of years where I sort of did more, essentially got deeper into data analysis. And I guess management consultants spend a lot of time making spreadsheets. So I spent a lot of time making spreadsheets at Google. I guess I got the opportunity to do a lot more of sort of SQL data analysis, actually using sort of the big tools that sort of almost anyone in Google has access to if they want them, which is actually really cool. Even though I was sort of just a sort of random data guy, sort of sat in London, got access to incredible world-class tools at Google. Was there for a couple of years and then followed someone who I'd sort of met socially, but was also a customer at Google, went to Circle, which is a crypto sort of finance business. And so I was there for a couple of years, worked on a load of stuff, Circle, really interesting business, and they're doing so well today. And the biggest thing I worked on there was USDC, so the sort of the stable coin. So the launch of that, I remember that being sort of super exciting. I remember us being quite excited at the prospect of maybe getting to a couple of billion USDC in issuance, and now there are sort of, I don't know what the number is, but I think we're north of 40 billion have been issued. And so it's really cool to be there at the start of that, and it's been great to see how well that's done since. I then did a couple of other things. I worked, sort of took a bit of time out, explored some sort of startup ideas with a friend of mine, which in the end didn't. We decided not to go ahead with them, but I think that was the right decision. Did some sort of freelance work with the Harry Potter digital franchise. That was a completely unlike anything I'd ever done before, thinking about wizarding experiences online. Then I worked for a supply chain technology business for a year, and that was sort of 2020. And so through lockdown, kind of got back in, actually went to a hackathon, ETH London, in January 2020, which kind of got me back into sort of thinking about Ethereum quite a bit. Built a bunch of dApps. So the biggest one for me was Nifty Inc., which is a NFT platform on Gnosis Chain, as it's now known, which I built with Austin Griffith. I did a bunch of work with him, which has been great, sort of developer onboarding, building Scaffold ETH, or contributing to Scaffold ETH, which is like a developer sort of prototyping toolkit. And sort of through that discovered subgraphs, built some subgraphs, thought they were cool. And so then when Edge and Node were hiring, I guess a year ago, that was how I ended up joining as a PM.
A lot of really incredible background there with some interesting work. I want to go back to the management consulting part of it. You're not the first guest that's been involved in management consulting, but I'd love to know your thoughts on that experience and more particularly what you learned about business in an experience like that.
I guess it was kind of so it's interesting. Like, I think it's maybe changed now, but certainly like lots of like the reason I went into it. Well, actually, my mum was a management consultant once upon a time, and so we talked about it, and it did seem like an interesting path. And like a lot of my friends were doing it. I think it is a really great place to start. Like if you don't know anything, like you sort of get parachuted into far sort of more like influential situations than a sort of 21, 22-year-old like has a right to. Don't get me wrong, management consultancies hire like smart kids, but they're also kids. But it means you kind of get, you get these ideas of like, you think you know how things work. You think you know how businesses are run. And like in some senses you do. Like I do think that management consultancies, strategy consultancies are capable of like getting a lot of work done, research done, like getting quite a strategic understanding of a market in quite a short space of time. But when it comes to the actually like the operational side of running a business, like I look back, like I was very naive then in terms of like my actual understanding of how hard it is to do meaningful work, how hard it is to actually align like a team or teams of teams in the same direction and to either bring something into existence or to really serve a market. Like I think those are things which you can't understand if you're sort of at arm's length working in a consultancy. So like I definitely learned a lot. I worked, as I said, with great people who I'm still in close touch with today. I'm still collaborating pretty actively with a bunch of them on side projects. And so it was definitely a great experience. But yeah, when it came time to go and do something else, I did feel like going and working in a business was what I wanted to do next.
So you went to Google, which is one of the biggest businesses in the world. How would you discuss what that experience was like and the things you learned there?
Yeah, so I joined Google and I was like, I was super excited to work there. And like, it is a cool place to work. You've got the sort of great vibe. Again, you've got lots of smart people from all the places. This was, I guess, whenever it was, 2014, maybe. And so people talk a lot about big tech these days. They do have amazing products. They've got just such amazing like infrastructure and tools, like I was saying earlier, around like you've kind of got a silver spoon, like as someone who's kind of learning a bit more about how technology actually works and how to build things. It was a great place to start. I almost didn't know how lucky I was. And also like the part I was working in, I was working essentially with some of the largest advertisers in the UK who advertise with Google. So sort of working with Expedia Group, Hotels.com, eBay, like people who spend lots and lots on advertising with Google, but often have like quite an interesting sort of relationship because they're sort of in some ways competitive. There's this sort of frenemy dynamic that was quite often in the background or sort of understood when you're having these interactions, because obviously it was our business to sell them ads and their ads were profitable for them. But in some cases, some other part of Google might be doing something that was a bit competitive. So it was really interesting to be like at that interface. And like I said, made a lot of friends, like built some fun stuff, had some quite cool things like collaborations with people from the finance team, San Francisco, which were again really like formative in terms of how I think about technology and some of the like thought-provoking conversations people that I met during my time there. So it's cool. But again, like I think when I left, I was kind of excited to be a part of something smaller, maybe something where I could feel a bit more impact, because it's hard to have an impact at a place as big as Google.
How did the experience of working at one of the largest technology firms in the world that happens to be the leader in Web 2, how did that experience inform the way you think about Web 3 and decentralization?
It's easy to take for granted. Just today there was a Slack outage. Slack wasn't loading, and see some proponents would point out that out as sort of a failure of Web 2 and one of the reasons why we need Web 3. But I think like to me that just highlights how well this stuff works like most of the time. And it's amazing what Google have built in terms of the infrastructure they've got, like how well it scales. Like I'd say that the number of users that Google is serving like every single moment of every single day is like unbelievable, particularly when you look at the size and scale of like Web3 now. We're talking like orders of magnitude of difference. And the fact that they still like that they go down, even though they are like centralized, emphasizes like how hard it is, the thing that we're all trying to do with Web3. it's hard to like scale Google, and like you've got whole teams building like incredible custom bespoke stuff that still like falls over sometimes. And we're trying to do this in like a distributed, trustless way. Like I'd say it was more inspirational because you had people building this amazing stuff. And I do think that there's definitely an adversarial like Web 2 versus Web 3 thing, which I don't feel like as deeply, partly because like the people at Google, most of them are trying to serve users, and you can disagree with the tools that they're using sometimes, or the way in which people are being tracked and like those kind of things. But I think like the adversarial thing, I don't feel it as deeply as I think a lot of people do. And that's maybe because I worked there and I didn't have a bad experience. I think the technology we're building is more interesting and more human. And like there's something like monolithic and like huge and vast about Google that isn't like a human thing. It's not like the world we evolved in. And like one of the things I love about Web3 is that like it makes the digital tangible. You can, because it's composable and it's open and it's permissionless, that's just like the world we kind of live in. If you ended up in a part of the world somewhere, you can breathe the air, you can use the water, like you have access to these public goods, you can interact with them, but you can also sort of make your own civilization. That's just not a thing that's sort of possible. Google, you have access to this amazing stuff as a user, but you're just not sovereign in the same way. You can't build these amazing composable things. And I guess that's the stuff that gets me excited about. Like I definitely do feel all the privacy stuff and the control, but I guess I like Web3 because I'm excited about the possibilities, as well as it's important to me that it's protecting against things as well. But I guess I'm here for positive reasons as well as avoiding the negative.
Have you thought through what happens to companies like Google, like Apple, like Facebook in Web3?
I think you'd be foolish to count them out or to assume that there won't be a place for them or companies that look a lot like them. They still have a lot of like incredibly smart people thinking about and like building some of the world's most incredible technology. I think that they're probably not sure how they interface with it, but I think that they could play a role. And I guess there are a few ways. I think it will be hard for them to sort of move as they currently are into Web3, in that like I think their sort of mindset and their approach is different to what you need to succeed in Web3. But I also like see in Web3 that the whole thing, like the whole playbook where you build a massive sort of powerful company that is like a market leader and owns an entire segment, and you have like control in your domain, whatever it is. Like you see that exists in Web3, and there are companies in Web3 that look kind of like the Googles of Web3. And I'm not talking about the Google of blockchain sort of graph branding side of things, but more like companies that look kind of like that. And that is kind of antithetical to the whole thing. And so I think we all need to be kind of mindful of that. And like, I don't necessarily see how we thread the needle of having power accruing to individual organizations or entities without disempowering the others, unless we do like have quite interesting things around governance and like other options. And but whether it's Google, Facebook, or Amazon or whoever, if they choose to play in Web3, I think you'd be foolish to count them out. But you'd also need to be aware of companies with huge ambitions who maybe raise lots of VC money and within Web3 are incentivized by their sort of equity structure to try and achieve the same kind of dominance. And then you end up with the same kind of thing. So I don't know. I think that there are some really great examples. So like within Ethereum, the diminishing role of the Ethereum Foundation over time has been really like a really interesting exercise in the opposite thing happening, at entity sort of ceding control or reducing its influence intentionally over time. That's not something that's quite counter to how a lot of capitalism and also like business sort of strategy sort of pushes you.
When you have the opportunity to explain Web3 to people that don't know about it, how do you explain what it is and kind of like what the impact of it could be in the world?
I do definitely. I struggle here as well because Web3 is so much in the eye of the beholder. Actually, I met someone at the weekend. So I mentioned Nifty Inc., which is this NFT sort of artist platform on Gnosis chain. So it's been about sort of, I guess, 18 months that it's been live now, and it's a super simple app. Basically, it lets you draw drawings on a thing that looks like Microsoft Paint, and then it lets you sort of sell those drawings or put them up for sale, or just send them to your friends, or maybe create loads of copies, like whatever you want. So I met an artist in Denver who was a sort of Nifty Inc. artist, and I think that she said that the first, like Nifty Inc. was the first time she kind of got Ethereum because it was kind of accessible to her as an artist. She could just show up, like paint something, put it up, people would then buy that for her. She's then suddenly got some cryptocurrency. She's not had to sort of enter it via like going into Coinbase, having to do a load of KYC, wire a load of money to this organization that you don't fully understand, buy some token that has some ticker that seems to like oscillate wildly. And yet that is currently the only path into Web3 or crypto, really, right? Like, is there a starting point that doesn't start with, okay, get a wallet, go to Coinbase, like buy some stuff? That's like such an unintuitive and it's not a great like user experience because it immediately feels like incredibly transactional and speculative. And don't get me wrong, that's what a lot of the industry, the focus of the industry is quite financial at the moment. But I think that for me, that thing of onboarding people by the things that it can unlock, which in the case of like Nifty Inc. is that you as an artist can create a piece of art. Someone in the other side of the world could then buy that from you. You could then have some value, which you could use to buy from other artists. And you're just doing this like in a peer-to-peer way without really having to like ask anyone. You're just sort of showcasing your creativity. People are appreciating that. It's a market that didn't possibly exist. And you've also just got this like quite nice community who aren't just there to make incredible sums, but just appreciate the art. Like, I think those are the that's the possibility of Web3 in that it unlocks like new interactions that aren't currently possible or like are easy or actually just aren't even possible. And so, so I guess I'm biased. It's the thing that I work on and I do appreciate that, but like it's those kind of things that I love about the space.
Earlier, you said that Web3 brings an element of tangibility. In what ways does Web3 introduce tangibility to users or participants?
As much as I don't like, so NFTs, I don't like as a name because it's defining something by what it's not. And does anyone even know what fungible means? It's such a weird way to describe something. But for me, the internet introduced abundance to people, right? Suddenly you could copy things, pictures, you could copy everything like infinitely. And you could talk to like absolutely sort of everybody. Like everyone could watch the same video, like do all those kind of things. And I think we've kind of internalized that that's just how the internet and computers work. But that's not a thing that actually exists anywhere else. Like that's an entirely artificial thing, like that abundance online. Like in the rest of our world, in our day-to-day life, we don't go around like nothing is abundant. And so for me, I don't like the thing where you sort of introduce like artificial scarcity of an asset, like or seeing that as a high good. But like I think there is something about Web3 where you can actually finally own something online, like feel that sense of ownership or that it is a thing that you're able to kind of hold in your hands. I think that is quite human and also is like more like the world we actually live in. I think we don't necessarily want to make everything scarce because actually abundance on the internet is amazing as an unlocked so many great things. But I think it is to own something online and to actually own it, and even though like you don't necessarily own the sole access to it, but actually like it's provably yours. I think that feels quite like a sort of evolutionary like human thing, which is sort of inside all of us. The thing where like if you give people a pen, then they'll sort of value it more highly than a pen that is just like on the table. Like there's something in that it's like, and I'd say a thing that like for me that I've a sort of mindset that I've evolved over the last few years is more anything that humans have been doing for like a long, long time is worth thinking about and reflecting on and like paying attention to, because it often like speaks to something sort of shared that we all have. And so, and I think like I definitely didn't think that. Like I definitely had a bit more of a, what's the word? I love new things more when I was younger, and I thought like newness sort of was prized, and like whereas now I think I have a bit more. Well, I guess it's age, isn't it? But like more of an appreciation for the things that have been done for a very long time. I actually thought this when I was in Turkey, went to a sort of Turkish bath with a friend of mine, and I don't know if you've ever done that, but essentially you get sort of covered in boiling water and hot water, and then sort of bloke sort of pummels you, and then at the end you feel great, and it's one of those things that people have been doing forever, and I was like, yeah, people have known for a while that this makes you feel good.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ. Every week, the GRTiQ podcast shines a light on the people working to build the graph in Web3. The stories shared on this podcast not only inspire and educate, but when joined together, they create the narrative that's driving Web3, what it is, why it matters, and how you can get more involved. This podcast is fueled by the support of listeners like you. So if you've been impacted by something you've heard by one of the guests, then please take a moment and help spread the word. Share your favorite episodes on social media, leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, or simply share what you heard with a friend or family member. We're early. There's room for everybody, so don't just listen to the stories shared on this podcast, but go write your own and make a contribution that can change the world. So going back to your personal story a little bit, you went from management consulting to Google, and then from Google, you went to Circle. And I'm interested in what you did there. Can you talk a little bit more about what you were working on?
Sure. So I joined Circle not really knowing much about crypto, I guess. So I did once write a blog post about how when people Googled Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin went up, and that we should all just Google Bitcoin because then the price would go up more. But apart from that, I hadn't really looked into it so much. But I joined, sort of was recruited by someone called Marique Fremont, who'd been a customer. But yeah, I'd also met her on the basketball court with a friend of mine playing basketball. Yeah, colleague at Google had done an MBA. They'd all done an MBA together. But anyway, so I followed her to Circle. Seemed like a good opportunity. They were just sort of starting an office in London and needed help sort of with data analytics type stuff, which was my area, I guess. And yeah, like I think I said earlier, it was a smaller place. It seemed like there'd be sort of a lot of scope for growth, personal growth, also learning like a whole new industry. That was appealing. At Google, like I said, I had a good time at Google, but also selling ads didn't make my heart sing. So I thought I'd try something else. And so sort of landed and I think immediately appreciated like how much infrastructure I'd relied on at Google to actually do any analytics, because I kind of had to sort of land in. There wasn't really a lot of infrastructure. So I had to, again, like ongoing theme, met some really great friends there who I'm still in touch with, who we built some cool stuff together on the analytics side. That was actually then where I sort of transitioned into product management after doing a lot of sort of internal stuff, looking at everything from sort of trading performance to sort of retention of users, acquisition of users, through to actually working pretty closely with the trading desk there to like think about their P&L and like build dashboards and better visualizations and those kind of things. And that was then when I transitioned into product management, which I don't think I fully knew what it was, but it seemed kind of interesting, sort of just working, I guess going from being a sort of individual contributor, sort of data analyst, sort of doing sort of stuff end to end, to actually working with engineers who actually built real software products. That was and that was a really pivotal transition for me, I guess. There isn't, well, at least in Europe, there's not a sort of path into product management like there is in some places, like in the US, where you've got the big tech companies. They have sort of associate product manager programs that, like in Europe, you generally sort of do a sort of lateral move at some point in the company. And so Circle was where I had that opportunity. And so that was cool. It was obviously, you always slightly feel for the engineering teams who work with new product managers, because I made loads of mistakes, like prioritized some of the wrong things and like all this kind of stuff. But it was good experience. That was then where I guess I actually had my first, was still doing a lot of stuff on the sort of operational and like finance, banking, like integration type side. But that was also, I guess, where I had my first sort of really actually working with crypto stuff. And that was good to get to understand. It was obviously like, it was in 2017, which was a pretty wild time in crypto. I remember we were all sat in all hands when Bitcoin hit 20,000 or wherever it got to in 2017, and everyone was going crazy. But so I enjoyed my time at Circle. We built a lot of stuff. We had some fun. Like I'd always worked in the sort of in the UK branch of a US firm, I guess, in all three jobs. So I had kind of parallels there. But spent a decent amount of time in Boston, sometime in San Francisco, and I love going to America. So it was a fun experience. And like I said, the highlight was working on. I mean, it was USDC was a fun and sort of stressful time to launch a new thing, and it's been cool to see it do so well since.
So you were part of the team that launched USDC?
Yeah. So it was. It was really. I'd say it was the focus of a huge part of the company. I can't remember quite when in the year, but I do remember that there was just a point where it became the most important thing for us to deliver. And so so it was a pretty big team, but I was working with Joao, who's still there, and Edix, who's now at Recur. So interesting to see sort of what people have ended up doing. But like Circle's definitely been a place where people have gone off to do loads of really interesting stuff within crypto and outside it. It was us. Well, I guess that, like it was one of those where everyone kind of got involved in the end, and it became a pretty exciting thing to rally around. I think we did kind of have this hope that it would launch and be like a big bang. Suddenly, everyone would want stable coins, and like we did get a bit at the start, but in the end, I think it's been testament to sort of ongoing hard work and like grinding away, and now, like I said, it's been growing pretty explosively.
So USDC is a staple within crypto now. It's just, something that everybody talks about as though it's always been around. What did that experience of building and launching that and now seeing where it is today, what is that experience like for you? And did you learn anything along the way?
Yeah. So I mean, it's cool. I get paid in USDC, so that's a fun thing. I definitely say I learned a lot about like launching things, both in terms of like how hard it is, firstly, to actually trying to get everything done, get everyone aligned, get everything like out the door. I learned how fun it is also, like on launch day. I still remember like walking across, I was in Boston at the time, like walking across the park, like all hyped up to go and do it. And I really enjoy like releasing things. I get a buzz from like seeing something that I've worked really hard on, and most often worked really hard on with other people, like seeing that into the world. Yeah, so got sort of learned how to launch this quite big, complex thing. Learned that I enjoyed that thing. Yeah, as I said, like learned some things that we could have done better at the time. In terms of, it's always the important. Like I think it's often really hard to get the technical side and the go to market to both be in sync. And often like one will be ahead of the other. And I think so that was a learning. But yes, since then it's been really cool to see how it has. So I mean, it was a great idea, I think. Obviously, Tether was the preeminent stablecoin at the time, which has had its own sort of troubles, controversies, like over the years. And a core part of the USDC thesis was always to be sort of buttoned up and like fully audited, like those kind of things. And I think that they've delivered on it. It's been great to see them sort of also be on other chains and sort of continue to grow. To see Circle, I think they've doing great work in terms of the more sort of B2B side, helping people and helping grow that USDC ecosystem. So I think I left about sort of 5 months after, maybe. So it was like sometime after, but I was there for a bit after, but like I'm mainly just proud for making it happen like ever since, because it's like it's not a given. It's really hard to make something grow to quite how big it's become now.
Somebody with your background and the different companies you've worked at and probably the professional network you have could do a lot of different things. So how do you explain or think through why you landed in crypto? What the appeal of working in this space is for someone like yourself?
Yeah, it's a reasonable question. I think that a lot of it is, I think for me, like it's good to know yourself, or to get to know yourself increasingly over time. Self-knowledge is sometimes hard to actually know what you want, what makes you tick. And I guess it was one of those things where like I definitely found it interesting at Circle. Like when I left because I wanted to try this other thing. We had quite an exciting idea at the time. It didn't pan out, like I said, but I guess that then a couple of years later, I just kept finding myself coming back to building on Web3. So building with Ethereum, sometimes starting hackathons, sometimes finishing hackathons. And it was one of those things where I just think that it's good to pay attention to what you're paying attention to, and to like see if you should actually just follow your instincts a bit and go back into it. I'd say that for me it was really that sort of through 2020 I was starting to do these sort of side projects, working with some people I really enjoyed working with, like encountering technology that I thought was really cool. So it was then just sort of kind of impossible to ignore and to not give it a go, particularly because there's so much sort of exciting possibility in the space.
So after you got interested in crypto, you eventually make your way to Edge and Node. And for listeners that don't know, Edge and Node is one of the 5 core dev teams working at the Graph. What was it that drew you to Edge and Node then? Yeah,
so I first came across the Graph in a hackathon. I applied for a hackathon, built a little thing on a subgraph, and that was the first like my first kind of interaction with it. I was still pretty early in my sort of front end development experience, so Like I'm sure if I went back and looked at that app now, it looked pretty gnarly, but it was cool to sort of get a taste and to sort of see some of the data that it made available to me. Like I knew nothing about sort of smart contracts at that time, but I could sort of visualize this protocol. It was basically visualizing streams between different people in a payments network. And then I sort of went away, didn't think about it too much. And like I said, built this app called Nifty Inc. And at the time, I remember when we were talking about it, building it, and we were like, oh, should we build a subgraph? And we are like, no, let's just kind of try and release it. And that's too much overhead for now. Let's just try and do the simplest thing. And so then it was only sort of 2 months later, I think, that the app had become like incredibly heavy and unwieldy, and like was having to poll and the node like so much to the RPC node to get the data that it needed. I basically built a subgraph and like refactored everything and got it to work. That I sort of, in doing that, became a sort of graph fanboy, in the sense that it made my app so much simpler. I could do stuff that wasn't even possible. And I guess I came to the graph as a user, which I think is really, really cool. Place to start. And think about where I am now. I've never worked on a product that I've been a user of before. So that was kind of how I guess the other thing that I saw was that in building my subgraph, I came across a bug. And so I reported the bug on Discord, and Leo like solved it in like 12 hours later or something. And I was like, hey, this is cool. These guys move fast. And then they're like responsive to users. So I had this good user experience of building a thing that made my life a lot easier. I had like an interaction where they'd listen to me, a random like developer on Discord. And so then when I saw that Edge and Node were hiring, Edge and Node actually only sort of formed in January of last year. So when I saw they were hiring, I thought it was cool they were hiring a product manager, which is what I did in my day job. And I thought it would be nice to do in the daytime what I was spending evening and weekends working on.
So for listeners that are curious about what your role at Edge and Node is, can you provide just an overview of what you do at Edge and Node and some of the projects you're working on?
Sure. So I'm a product manager at Edge and Node, focused on GraphNode. So that's the sort of the indexing software that powers subgraphs, the graph in general. And so what does that mean? That means I spend a lot of time thinking about subgraph developers. So spending time with subgraph developers, that can be getting on calls with them to ask them questions, trying to solve their problems, getting put in touch with people who are trying to do new and interesting stuff. So there's a lot of sort of discovery, but then it's also a lot of coordination. And working internally with a lot of the incredible engineers, other PMs, like who are working on this stuff across the core development ecosystem. So obviously work a lot with the engineering team at Edge and Node, who are like founding developers on GraphNode, but then also working a lot with other core devs, so Streaming Fast, Figment, in particular, working with some other sort of grantees and contributors who are also contributing to GraphNode, GraphCLI, GraphTS, all of the tools that developers use to build subgraphs, and then also contributing and participating in some of the research discussions on some of the newer things, whether that's on the indexing side or on the network side. So a mix of stuff, and it's mainly fun to be in a spot where you get to work with so many different people across the ecosystem.
Well, you're not the first guest to come on the podcast who was a user of the graph and then migrate into a full-time role. What's the explanation behind how it happened or why it happened for you?
I think it does come down to just subgraphs were a magical experience for me, like building my first one that made my life easier. And it's come on a long way since I, like in terms of the Web3 or Ethereum, even the Ethereum specific development stack has come on a long way since I started doing stuff. The tooling is better than it was. But I think like if you're a developer and you feel the pain and then you find a thing that's the solution and you have the opportunity to work on that thing, then that's just a lovely sort of confluence of things. And so I guess that was what got me excited, because it's like so clearly the answer to an important question, which is like, how do we get the data that I need out of the blockchain? And it like answered in such an elegant way. Like the design of subgraphs is just super intuitive and like pretty easy. Like there are some edge cases and there are always things you can get better, but you'd sort of define 3 files, you deploy a thing and you get a usable API out, and you can not worry about that thing anymore. And you can just go on to actually focusing on your smart contract, or you can like quickly iterate between these things. It just fits so like nicely into the toolkit. And I think that different people like have come in with different perspectives, like folks who've come in from running indexes, sort of see the power of the network and also just the strength of the ecosystem. So I guess the thing I mentioned about Leo solving a bug in no time at all and pushing it and helping me out. Like I think people also see that not only is the tech cool, but it's an open ecosystem that values outside contribution, that wants people to come in and to be a part of it. And I don't think that, like, as well as the cool tech, which I guess I emphasize quite a lot there, actually the people and the human side of things is really appealing too.
A lot of what you're saying, if you were to look at it under a microscope, is this passion or this draw for builders. And it seems to me that you have a real interest in building things that are useful for developers because you are in fact one, and you probably have a very low tolerance for things that don't enable the work of developers.
Yeah, definitely resonates with me. I think that, like, for me, the subgraph developer is just so important. Like, within the ecosystem, they're the folks who understand the data that's on chain, that manage to turn it into like really useful, consumable information. So there, I guess, well, I'm product manager working on graph nodes, so it makes sense that that's like my North Star. But I just feel like for the graph, like, developers and the developer experience is so important. So I know that people talk about the graph sometimes as the Google of blockchains, and that's not a I don't actually love that way of describing it, because I feel like with Google, you show up and you ask a question, you get an answer. It's sort of there's a bit of sort of Google like has the information that you need, whereas with the graph, you actually bring your own knowledge and what you know about what data is on chain. You create the API that you need for your application to serve your users. So actually, there's a sort of bringing your own information to the graph that I think is the really powerful thing, where it's not just an API that's generic. And don't get me wrong, I think we could do better to provide more generic APIs for people who want the same things. And like, that's definitely something that I'm interested in from a product perspective, serving those consumers more. But a key part of it is empowering developers to come with the contracts that they're interested in, the events that they're interested in, and then to create the API that will serve their users. I think we can't lose that focus on that use case, because that's sort of what's got us here. And I think it's also going to be so key for Web3 in the future. It's always going to be about the community coming together to create information, not relying on one entity to say this is truth.
I have a sense of what your answer will be, but I would love to hear you just articulate it. But when you think about Web3 and you think about developers, especially now in the early days, trying to build utility and user experiences, how critical is the graph to everything that's happening presently and into the future?
So for me, and I meet so many people who are building on the graph, where the graph is like a core part of their infrastructure. And it's amazing how pervasive it is, or how widely used subgraphs are, because they do answer that really simple need of like, there's data on chain, I need to show it to my users. And so the graph is critical, but I think the thing that keeps me motivated is when I see subgraphs and the graph in general, like, not doing what those developers need it to do. So maybe it's a situation where there's a filter that they need, and as a result, they can't show a certain view to their users, or maybe they want to combine data across subgraphs in a way that they can't do currently, or maybe they want to do some kind of processing, like reaching out across data streams, or maybe they even want to extract it in a different way. Like, every time I see people who are like, and you can learn a lot from when you see people using your product that's not in the way that you expect or you intended. You can basically learn that there's something that you've not seen there. So I guess the way I feel about the graph is that it is crucial to so many Web3 applications, but there are so many ways in which it can also be improved to better serve more use cases for developers, so they don't have to hack subgraphs, or so that they don't have to still hit RPCs or run their own servers, or relying on hitting the node. I just think there's still so much possibilities. There are so many use cases that subgraphs don't currently serve. And I guess that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, because it is hugely motivating to solve problems. So again, that we can get that sort of work out their way. Like, if you're building an app, you didn't sign up to build your own indexer. You just want the data. And so if we can stay focused on that, there's so much opportunity. And that's why I love thinking about subgraphs.
As I've come to know and better understand the Web3 space and the way the graph fits into it, like I said, presently or into the future, I've become more and more aware of this interplay between centralized solutions and decentralized solutions, and this competition between Web 2 and Web 3. There's all these different themes that kind of emerge. I'd love to take this opportunity to just kind of ask you, when it comes to Web 3 and a Web 3 stack, how important do you think decentralization is for the Web 3 stack?
Sure. So I think, and I was talking to actually one of our new Rust engineers about this. Sort of decentralization is one of those hard things, because again, different things to different people, but it also exists on like a range of dimensions. Like, you can be centralized in one way and decentralized in another way. But I think that if Web3 is to achieve or deliver on the promises that it makes, that I think decentralization is like absolutely crucial, because in general, like in a stack, you're only actually as decentralized as your most centralized point. Like, if you rely on one centralized thing and that thing falls over, chooses not to serve you, changes its API, your app's fallen over and you need to sort of work around it and do something different. So yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial. You can get into like definitions of logical decentralization, political, like those kind of things. But in terms of the tools that you as a developer are using, I think it's interesting because there is a question around like, do users care about decentralization? I think lots of users sort of current users of Web3 don't care, or it's not so important or motivating for them. And developers, as a result, developers don't have like, users aren't always saying, is this decentralized? Is this decentralized? Some are, but I wouldn't say that that's a really like loud chorus. But I would say that the tricky thing right now is that it's actually hard or almost impossible to build a fully decentralized app if you want to deliver on delightful user experiences. So that's everything from like, how do you do notifications, even simple stuff of like, when you paste a link on a website and it unfurls, like unfurling in a decentralized way is actually really hard for various reasons. It's like decentralization is super hard. I think it is super important to actually deliver on the stuff that everyone talks about. And it's easy to skip over or to paint over the gaps along the way. And you can't hold that. I think you can expect developers to use the best decentralized tools that are available, but you also can't be too judgmental if the tools just aren't there. And that's why I think the Graph and others who are building developer tools are so crucial, because if they are able to do it in the right way, then actually developers can take stuff off the shelf. They can actually do this stuff in a much easier way. We don't necessarily get there by being judgmental. We get there by making it easy for developers to build in the right way.
I understand, because of other interviews and conversations like this, the value the Graph provides to developers. I understand also how the Graph adds value to Web3 more broadly. How do the use of dApps benefit or create value for the users of dApps? Why is it better for the world to have adoption of or more use of dApps?
So I guess it comes down to like what a dApp is, but I think one of the coolest things that you kind of see in Web3 is the fact in Web2 the like ownership of the UI is like pretty tightly coupled to the application as a whole. There are ways like lots of people, businesses do build business on top of Gmail's API, but that's shifting sands and you're always like at risk of the whims of the Gmail PM or engineering team changing that API and how you can access it. The thing that you see in Web3, where essentially Uniswap have got an app that you can use to interact with Uniswap, but you don't have to use it. And actually, I built when I was learning about Uniswap, I built sort of quite a ramshackle version of a Uniswap UI, but that would let you actually just interact with that thing. And what's cool about that is that it basically lets people fork away and create the things that are useful to them on top of the same shared data. And so any individual dApp isn't necessarily good, but the fact that it could be replaced by another sort of competing one, the fact that it could be easily if one dApp developer decides to be malicious in a given way, or if they fall over, if they go out of business, that someone else could just spin up another one. That's part of the power of this stuff, that you get permanent apps, that you get a guarantee that stuff isn't going to go away. You've got these applications that will just run in perpetuity forever. And all you need to do is maybe you can just pin a file to IPFS and fetch it down, and that's then your website. That's pretty cool. That's the thing that means that you as a user don't have to worry about your sort of app being shut down by whichever company decided it wasn't worth their while anymore. And so any individual, any individual app is just an application, but it's the fact it's the possibility of others and the possibility of permanence that I think is really cool for users.
Does privacy and data, personal data, factor into any of this?
I think this is an area where Web3, we still don't have a great, or certainly not a unified sort of story, because so much of Web3 right now is basically everyone's open financial information. There are obviously some places where you can find more privacy, but it's sort of been normalized that people know people's ENS, and if you know people's ENS, you can see the NFT they bought. And that is kind of, I don't know if that will be a sort of short-lived phenomenon. I do think, if you think about some of the serious reasons why sort of Bitcoin was sort of started in the first place, I don't think Satoshi had in mind that everyone would just be able to see everyone's bank balances all the time. Privacy has always been pretty tightly coupled with the movement in general. I think the technology wasn't there before, but like with zero knowledge and a lot of the improvements in that area, which isn't my area of expertise, but which seems to have just come on unbelievable leaps and bounds. And like I think there is a possibility of much making privacy more of a first class citizen, because where we're currently at is almost hilarious in terms of how open it is.
Well, I love that answer, and I appreciate the vision you're setting forth there. So as you look forward then on Web3 and the future here, in terms of adoption and growth and evolution, what are some of the challenges that you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, it's definitely a good question. I don't think I have an original answer to this. I think the things I think of are a lot of the things that we're aware of, but everyone knows that sort of the gas price on layer one and general scalability of like Ethereum specifically needs to be addressed, and that community is rallying around to solve that problem. But I think that will continue to be an issue, and any blockchain which actually achieves and starts to achieve scale will encounter similar technical or economic growth hurdles. And so I think that we're still, in terms of the population of planet Earth, we're nowhere near the throughput that we need at the blockchain layer, which I think is a core base layer. So it's cool to see everything from roll-ups through to some sort of more data availability stuff that's coming out. Those challenges are being addressed, and it's inspirational to see these sort of decentralized communities coming together to solve these problems. But yeah, that's definitely a big hurdle. I think the infrastructure one, kind of the graph works on, is another core one. That's not just sort of subgraphs, but all of the tooling around building decentralized applications is still pretty low level. There aren't that many abstractions above the EVM still. Essentially, everyone's still building stuff that's quite granular. And I think that's cool and makes a lot of sense. And you've got amazing stuff being done. But in terms of onboarding more developers and also empowering the developers that we currently have to build faster, more robust applications, they need better tools. And then I think, I guess, just to continue going up the stack to the applications, I think I've been amazed by the extent to which NFTs have cut through in the public consciousness. I think it's maybe related to the fact that you can get a good headline, and if you can talk about a picture of an ape being sold for sort of millions of dollars, I can see why that's hooked people maybe more than DeFi or things that were maybe slightly harder to conceptualize. There's something about NFTs that I think is really and actually maybe even part of it is just that they're so visual as well. So it makes for a much sort of more eye-catching headline than a picture of a sort of a financial chart. But even so, I think it's definitely been amazing to see DeFi and the financial aspect of everything that's happening on Web3 on all chains mature over the last couple of years. If you think back to 2017, it was basically a bunch of ICOs and nothing really happening on chain. Centralized exchanges were where the game was at. Now, DeFi is crazy. There's just huge volume. There's real participants from quite traditional finance. There is liquidity. There's the sort of financial system has kind of been built or is being built more and more on chain. But I feel that's still kind of an infrastructure-y layer. Even though some of these things do serve as applications, there aren't things that users will use, and it's not original to say that blockchain and Web3 needs to find the use cases and actually deliver on some of them to achieve scale. But that's the truth. You've definitely got some cool stuff. You've got some truly novel experiences. You've got creators getting paid like they've never been paid before in some cases, but you've also got lots of problems where people worrying about IP protection and people worrying about people's security and all those kind of things. So I kind of feel a lot of infrastructure or quasi-infrastructure has kind of been built, or lots of the applications are still a work in progress.
Well, Adam, I really appreciate this conversation and some of the insights you've shared here. And thank you so much for being generous with your time. If listeners want to follow you or learn more about the work that you're doing, what's the best way to stay in touch?
Sure. So I'm on Twitter. I'm not particularly active, but I'm a Zachary F on Twitter, and I'm Adam F on Discord with a sort of little dude stood in front of a sort of red sky holding a surfboard. That's me in the graph Discord. So either of those work. I'm always happy to chat about the graph. Also, just building apps on Ethereum is also a passion of mine. So yeah, love to chat to anyone who's interested.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast.